I think we're going to start seeing more bespoke one-offs with AI tools being leveraged in order to convey information.
I think that AI is going to be like this, like a split. Now there's like 50% of people are using AI and 50% of people aren't, for example. I feel like it's just another branch in this kind of like ever-growing umbrella of just like crap that people have to know.
So, we can say, oh no, we've lost control over this process, or we could we could be creative ourselves.
More to your point, like I have a weekly ritual.
Welcome to the Unverified podcast. I'm Laszlo Andrasi, and this is part 2 of my conversation with Jason Pieper and Mario Romero. Today, we're going to be talking about AI in the architecture industry and how we see it shaping the future of the industry. Welcome to the conversation.
Of your own design. And now we're getting into this era of AI and all the different subcategories of that. And again, I don't think that it's this totally separate thing. I just think it's yet another nested tool within this whole genre of computational design.
That's where I think the conversation gets really interesting. I think it depends on who you ask, because up until now, the person who was doing the computational design had direct control over the inputs, right? Mm-hmm. And they understood, I give this input, I get this exact output. Because of this, you'd be able to open the Python script in that Grasshopper node and understand exactly how you got to that output. Mm-hmm. Now we have AI, which I think it's another nested doll situation based on the variety of different AI, typologies out there. But I think there is a big difference. I think it is the next kind of paradigm shift potentially that we're seeing.
For sure.
And they work very well in tandem with each other, but there is a slight difference there. Do you guys? I mean,
that's why I use the analogy of Russian dolls. Because they're not separate. They are contingent upon what comes before it. So, if you look at like our parents' generation, in order to know how to do AutoCAD well, you had to know how to hand draft well.
Right.
Like it was contingent upon that. In order to know how to do BIM well, you have to have some understanding of drafting in a computer, and so on and so forth. And I think that AI is another outgrowth of that. I mean, I think in a lot of ways it's going to lower the barrier of entry. It's going to open up a whole new world of opportunities to people who are interested in entering the design realm. But I think the people who are going to be able to use it well are going to be the people that understand the essence of design well, who understand this concept of iteration, of what parameters or aspects they want to focus on and control, and how do you put those into relationship with one another. And that's how you are able to like hone a craft with these AI tools. And it's just a tool again. And it's not necessarily this, I don't see it as a totally separate and different thing.
You did mention something there, is use AI well. And I thought that was pretty interesting, because that totally varies on what is the grading criteria for that kind of statement, right? Is it you used AI in a way that you get consistent results or something and you're able to replicate? I don't know. Or is it just like you made a really cool image and now that's what the client really understood? So that's where it gets interesting, because like parametric design, you're using a really cool script, or you think it's really cool. If you don't use it well, you're not going to really get a useful output, or you might get something that looks kind of interesting, but it's just the geometry's trash and you're going to have to post process it a ton and get a whole bunch of compound curves or something like that.
Mhm.
Versus, AI becomes this thing where it's like, I don't know if there's as much control as we think there is at the moment. At least for like the large LLM stuff, right? Where it's like anybody could go to ChatGPT and write like an SD narrative on a project or like throw in a contract and say, what is this saying to me? And I feel like there's a potential that we lose out on the critical thinking that we were developing with the previous kind of nested dolls in your scenario, right? Where everything from hand drafting, where you had to be very particular on how the line and the line weight, all the way down to the grasshopper script, there was an intentionality to all of that. Versus AI, that's the where that intentionality, I feel like starts. There's a potential for it to kind of dissipate. So,
I think so, Laz. I think it's an order of magnitude. To be perfectly honest with you, I think one thing is that to going back to the kind of the conversation that, or the string of thought that Jason was having in regards to like originally kind of as computers within architecture started kind of taking hold, the metaphors by which we kind of interacted with the tool sets and how we kind of extracted the useful information that we wanted from, because realistically and at the end of the day, our work, what it kind of comes down to is instilling and encoding information into a medium that can be conveyed to somebody else in a clear, concise way that they can then use to build out or to assemble the thing that we are sort of defined, right? And set out. Like that is baseline what architecture is if you removed any of the story, the life, the blood of the work, right? And so when you look at it from that perspective, we start understanding the metaphor of course, the first initial versions of CAD, right, of computer aided drafting, of computer aided design drafting, um, borrowed or cribbed from the metaphors of draftspeople before, right? Like I interact. How do I make an arc? Oh, a compass, right? I need to set a point, set out from that point, draw arc based off of length, set out construction lines to remove what I don't, and keep in place what I want. And so that begins to sort of also almost like without thought encoding a way and a culture in which you do something, right? So as a for instance, Laz, you and I can sit down and Jason, you and I can have a laugh about the damn eraser pillow that we had to like throw down, right? As we were drafting to make sure that, because it's fucking hilarious. It is an artifact of its time, right? It's just like, man, how ridiculous was that we needed to do that in order to ensure that our lines were legible and clear and precise. It's the same thing with all other technologies built up to now. The only distinction is that I think like learning BIM, right? Learning how to like operate within Revit required you to understand what CAD was. It required you to understand the concept of construction lines, the concept of points in space, the understanding of what connecting two lines mean equate to a polyline, like baseline sort of geometry. That in itself is sort of its own culture. And I think once we do the work of becoming ingratiated to that culture, we kind of lose the understanding of the effort that it took us to get there. And so bear with me, this is a long string here, but I think genuinely with the advent of AI within our practice, within the kind of practice of architecture, I'm like getting blurry here, I apologize. But I think what will happen is that like genuinely, if you're operating Revit now, you're kind of using computational design, right? Like Jason's
Yeah.
pointing out like constraints, right? Like I need to understand like that those are essentially what parameters are. Parameters are constraints to the architecture. Like you're not going to be able to join a wall to another wall unless you meet particular conditions, unless it's hosted to a floor, right? That those are constraints, those are parameters. You are operating within a computational design space. However, you're operating within a design space that was agreed upon by us colloquially, right? Like this is what drafting means. This is what creating elements are. I think we're going to start seeing more bespoke one-offs with AI tools being leveraged in order to convey information, which I think is like very fascinating and interesting. Like you don't like, and again, this is like very far off, far flung, but imagine like not needing Revit, but delivering within your own particular sort of executable exactly what you need. Obviously, it's going to be a little bit difficult because we have the constraints of industry, right? And I think that's the other thing that we never really touch on in regards to computational design conversations is that we work with other people. Like at the end of the day, we're not even the most important person in the pipeline of like getting the project done. I don't think like it's like boots on the ground, right? It's like it's the people actually out there doing the work. Like how many times have we been asked like what buildings did you build? Right? Yeah. The answer for me is always none. Because I've never built a building before. I've helped to contribute the building of that building, but I never specifically took, you know what I mean? So anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot to go into there.
Yeah.
I'm trying to decide which direction to go, but yeah, let's go the AI route. I think just because it fits the topic. First, one comment on like the Revit of it all is it's funny because it's totally computational design. It's just kind of under the hood and you just deal with it. And I think what ends up happening is I see a lot of designers not realizing that's what's happening. And then they misunderstand how to maybe optimize that kind of process and it gets them in trouble. You know, I'm like, you don't have to make everything parametric in a way. But in terms of AI, I think being used as like creating bespoke tools is really interesting. It gets into that whole interoperability kind of question of it all and what is our final deliverable, and it totally depends on who our partner is at the end. Is it a very sophisticated manufacturer, or is it a contractor that just wants a printed set of drawings that he can draw from? So I think that will maybe as the next generation of contractors come into the fold, they'll be, kind of like our generation, a little bit more savvy with these things, and we could see some interesting, interesting tools and kind of strategies develop. To kind of close out.
Something on a really interesting point there too, right? Like I don't think it's like to Jason's nesting doll analogy, like. I think it's within our kind of power so I worked on a project that was very, very like that. It was a project for the firm that we work at. It was a very large project. The specific fabricator that we were working with at the time was like, it's not that they weren't sophisticated. It's just, they had a very manual process. They were incredibly, incredibly skilled at what they did, but they only did it a particular way. The way that the owner's father did it, the way that their father's father did it, and that is, as a kind of heritage product, is understandable. But by kind of respecting that as a computational designer from our end, we kind of met in the middle, and it was like, I'm going to build up these tools, these kind of custom bespoke tools that will eventually output the thing that you are used to, but it kind of like in the background makes everything opaque for them. Like all of it was essentially where we have a feature kind of wall or a feature setting or a feature area that needs to be like sliced up, flat packed, and they're going to run this like flat pack cut file in order to like get all of the pieces that they need and then fabricate that in the shop, right? Super like fairly easy, fairly straightforward, but the way in which we're kind of working with them, it was sort of blowing their lid a little bit. And that was causing some sort of friction. And so, we pulled back. We're like, oh, okay, like understand your requirements, understand how you talk. Because primarily that's also another thing with like computational, that's why I keep using the phrase computational thinking, is like, it's about almost transliterating the way in which we all communicate. Again, it's the work of the architect, right? The work of the architect is to ensure collaboration and concise communication. So we had this conversation with the fabricator. We learned what language they spoke or what language they wanted to speak. We knew what language we could speak, and so we just did the translation.
Yeah. What's really, I love this point so much. And have you guys read the Phil Bernstein book, Machine Learning?
Yep.
Yes. All right.
Love it.
So Mario kind of knows where I'm heading. Jason, one of the major points that Phil speaks to in his book is how AI kind of started it and how he thinks it's going. And I think I agree with him on this point. And Mario was kind of talking about, I think what AI will really be leveraged for in the future is the interoperability of it all. And basically becoming we just input it all these different, different software, different deliverables, and it helps translate it into the end kind of usable product. So it would be really, I think interoperability is something that has been a common theme in our conversation so far in terms of, a big part of even what got us started in computational design, as a necessity, right? And it would be interesting to see how AI can eventually become a partner in that and help weave. I mean, if you think about all the different tools kind of available just on the architecture side, and then the challenges we have trying to connect those together, and then try to feed that into what our engineers are using in their bespoke tools, and then the manufacturers on top of that, and then contractors, with their different PIM software and all that. It's like it gets just totally unmanageable. And I think we're doing a really good job of it now, but being able to really facilely hop between these things would be really interesting. And I think even that's what, like, people who are using AI in a rudimentary level, just hopping on Chat GPT to do some coding, that's what it's doing. It's like translating really difficult, kind of hard topics that you don't necessarily have the specialty of doing and helping you perform those tasks. So coding is another great example of where AI is already being leveraged just super effectively. So
Yeah.
and I would love for you guys to expand on that.
I mean, I think we kind of find ourselves in this really unique window right now. It feels like we're in a watershed moment. It's almost like when the internet first came out, for like our parents' generation. It's, some of our parents, today will have like the latest iPhone and all the apps and everything, and they are, essentially well versed in how to use technology. And then like some of our parents still call us to ask, how do you Google something? Like you made it, like you made a conscious choice, like, oh, this wasn't interesting enough to me, or this really isn't that important. It's just another thing. And I think we're kind of at that point where we're going to find a very clear cut tipping point, like within our own generation, of who thought that AI is just something that I don't need to learn now, or I can learn later, versus those who are embracing the change and at least taking some, like, we don't have to be experts in it, but at least take some interest and become literate in it. The other thing too is, within this window, and like kind of what I've seen with some other technologies, like we can use Grasshopper as a good example, is I think we've got this like 5-year period. And in reality, I think we're at least 2 years into a lot of these AI tools being in the mainstream. Got this 5-year period of really sussing out the what is this tool good for. After that period of time, you're going to find a lot of redundancy. You're going to see a lot of people just kind of copying what they've seen before them. To go back to this grasshopper analogy, everybody knows how to make a waffle grid. Everybody knows how to do panelization. Everybody knows, how to do a sun study. Like, great. Like, and then like the creativity just sort of dies. It's like a slime mold that like reinforces its own infrastructure based on like what is already important before it. And I think we're going to run into that probably by the end of this decade with the AI tools. So it's going to be good to at least, like, everybody should have like some working knowledge of what those 10 commonly used functions of AI are going to be. But then how do you continue to be creative going forward? That's kind of where it's going to take people who are like just really fascinated and interested, who this idea of, oh, can I use AI? Can I just make an image? Okay, cool, great, everybody can do that. Versus, can I look at a problem and decide, well, should I use k nearest neighbors or should I use a random forest to achieve my goal? That's going to be a very small percentage of people, and those are the people that I'm really interested in like following now, and who I think are going to be the most successful with this technology going forward.
I mean, I think you've made a distinction between a practitioner and somebody who just kind of exists within the space of design. Like, truthfully, like I don't know. Yes, I agree with you. Like, I think that we find ourselves in this moment, like this fairly transformative moment of how we used to do work and how we used to kind of exist in the space of doing that work and how we will be doing work, right? And it's always this, as you pointed out, Jason, this like almost 2 to 5 year kind of threshold where a lot of this is kind of sussed out. And even like, more to your point, like I have a weekly ritual. That weekly ritual is opening up my web browser and middle clicking on AI AEC startups, which is a folder in my bookmarks, and seeing which one of them have like gone forward, which one of them just like redirect to nothing anymore. Because the amount of churn and the amount of tools that are being released, specifically within the AEC design space, like I have that folder has like 200 and some odd like bookmarks in there, and every week for the past 8 weeks, like it's been like 25% of them are going down, and we're starting to recognize and see the applicability, the utility, and the use case, the real world use case of these tools. Of like, in particular, we're talking about AI, but yeah, it's like it will contribute, add, and then it like morph and change the kind of the way in which we're operating. How that kind of comes about in the next like 2 or 3 years, that's kind of like the real question is, really what we're kind of seeing and like kind of experiencing even at like our own office, right? Like how are we each individually using AI in our own day to day? I mostly genuinely I use like ChatGPT to help me like rubber duck things. Like I talk at it about like particular problems that I'm facing like in the work that I'm doing, and it helps me like think through the thing. I haven't yet used it to adapt, like I haven't yet necessarily adapted directly to the work that I do, meaning I haven't modeled and like I don't directly integrate like an LLM in my Grasshopper scripts, for instance. I don't have an LLM continuously kind of churning. So what you could do is like set up an AI model that responds to your requests within your script. Like, hey, can we actually, I want this floor plate or this floor to be 14 feet. Can you implement that? And it does it in the script. It understands the logic of the script and it implements it within the script. So I think that's super cool, and I think that's super fascinating. That's more what I was getting at in regards to like these more facile individuals with utilizing AI in the work that they do will start making the tools as if they're simply like talking to the tool. Like, hey, why can't you do this thing for me?
So you don't need AI to edit that script because you're already, very proficient on making that script. But what AI the LLM in that script could allow someone who, barely knows Grasshopper, maybe someone out of school, maybe that would be the tool that helps them kind of bridge that gap. One thing I wanted to expand on is, or one way I see of it, I don't personally think that AI is going to be like this, like a split. Now there's like 50% of people are using AI and 50% of people aren't, for example. I feel like it's just another branch in this kind of like ever-growing umbrella of just like crap that people have to know or feel like they're missing out on. So like, there what there was a split
Again, more,
where
more
it's
to
like
that tool fatigue,
there's this
right?
BIM guy or whatever, and this isn't like true because computational came before BIM probably, but you know, it was like now you have this computational designer and then just the guy who's really good at Revit, and then now it's going to be that computational designer splitting into AI
Guy who's really good at
and then the guy
AI.
who's good
And
at that
then-
grasshopper script, and
yeah,
then
right.
it's kind of this ever growing kind of umbrella of like tasks that architects
Yeah.
are saddled with that I think is really interesting because it's like at the end of the day, I made a diagram for one of the presentations I gave before to the PM group where I'm like, well, you know, back in the day when we were, you know, caveman architects, we drew, cave drawings or something with charcoal, and now we used pencils in the 70s or whatever, and you know, then we had CAD, but it was still kind of the same thing. And we have this thing called BIM now, Revit, and I showed this cool rendering I did. But I'm like, it's still on a sheet of paper. Like it's still a 2D deliverable.
Yep.
And like as far as we've advanced until now, like we're still delivering essentially the same deliverable. And it's will AI be the thing that allows us to move past that? It's like it's so hard to tell. Construction and AEC in general is like it's this behemoth that is like what is that thing that will really paradigm shift it to like I guess beyond this like static kind of deliverable, and then it's something that I'm really interested to see, and maybe it's a possibility, but maybe it's just going to be another thing that someone just has FOMO of over, and
Well,
it's yeah.
Well, to loop back to this being a unique window in time, like the canon on AI tools is yet to be written. Like it is being written as we speak, and uh, we have this opportunity really to be a part of that history, if you will, and there whether or not it becomes this like watershed moment of like who uses this and who doesn't use it, I think the people who will emerge as leaders in the field are going to be defined now and in the next couple of years. And what makes you a leader in this field is going all the way back to what has made you a compelling designer or communicator forever. And that is how do you get to the heart of an idea and express it eloquently with this tool? And how do I convince other people that this is a good application of an AI tool as opposed to like just another junk thing? That's not anything that's unique to people who are interested in computers or coding or whatever. It comes down to who is a critical thinker and who's a creative thinker.
There's another flip side to this, right? Where it's like you're using AI to help you craft this story, which is kind of one way to go. It could be another way where AI helps you get rid of all the menial tasks that kept you away from being able to explore those kind of stories on your own. So I could definitely see, I love watercoloring, right? And it's like if AI lets me be able to do all the menial kind of tasks and give me like 15 more minutes of watercoloring a day, it's like a huge win, right? So I think there's another big aspect of the potential for this kind of technology where it helps it helps relieve the kind of tedious work. Like I love our spec writers, but that's a big task that a lot of people just would rather kind of automate itself away. And I feel like door schedules. I mean, we all have done it and cut our teeth on that. And yeah, I'd be okay with that task going away. Now, how does that affect? I guess here's the question: how do you think that kind of ease of productivity, I guess, being lifted, how do you think that's going to affect the future generations of people? Like that's all that mentorship and stuff that might all kind of go away because you can just ask an AI tool to kind of do this task for you. And unless the person who's above you squints and kind of looks at the work, they might miss that that was just done by Mr. Chatbot, you know? How do you think that's going to affect the future generation?
Jason?
Yeah, that's something that I've seen come up among my students actually quite a bit. Is some students are embracing these tools and are trying something new and using them, and then others are I don't know if it's threatened by them or what, but get kind of upset when they see their classmates, oh, they didn't really make that. The AI made it for them. And I don't know if I'm in a place to judge whether that's right or wrong, but it is something where, the one critique that I have over students who are kind of leaning into those tools is, yes, they're learning how to use them, but there is a lack of control over the tool itself. And that's just for like something that's inconsequential. It's like just making a rendering of a space. Okay, you showed me a plan that is all curved walls. Like, why does your rendering all have rectangular hard edges? You should at least be able to like see the difference between the two. How that plays into things that do have consequence, like life safety and accessibility, and whether or not your building burns down or stands up. I think it's always going to be a responsibility of the generations that come before to train the generations that follow. And so, we can say, oh no, we've lost control over this process, or we could we could be creative ourselves. And how can we use this tool to help be a part of the educational process? It's kind of on us. It's our own responsibility to be creative in how we apply it and how we engage with it, so that way we don't end up with that nightmare scenario of the next generation just losing touch with, I guess, what's important.
Yeah, I'm in a complete agreement with Jason. Like because we are a profession that primarily hinges its kind of future on the culture of apprenticeship, um, there's a kind of opposite to that as well, right? The expectation of the mentor to the mentee is to kind of meet in the middle. And also, like, it is on us, like the generation ahead of the current kind of like youth of like, or the current kind of working generation within our practice, to instill a care and craft, and like really spotlight that as a quality of a good designer, a good architect, where what it is that you generate and put out in the world is like integral to like the accurate representation of that thing. And so a lot of times, absolutely, like I've come across, like I've been in like reviews and things like that where it's exactly like what Jason kind of points out. Like, this is very clearly not the space that you've drawn. Why? And then we have this conversation of, well, because the tool is doing this thing, or like I had trouble like making it do exactly what I wanted to do. And that's a really good conversation to have, because that's a moment where you can kind of tell people like, then that is the moment that you need to understand that because it is not the thing that you are directly kind of working towards, it is not the thing that is speaking truth to your kind of intention. And yeah, like, I was told, I'm pretty sure all of us were told early on in our careers, like, that's not, like, hey, I made this really cool script that's like generating this tower, and like I made like 8 designs in like the span of a day, or 8 designs in the span of an hour. And I remember very distinctly being told, you didn't design that, the computer did. And I was like, no, I went in here and I like coded all of this and I made sure that these sliders were doing these things that
Right.
acted this way, that pushed and pulled these levers, and just because that person who I was showing this to didn't understand the quote unquote magic behind the show does not mean that there wasn't that much rigor and intent behind it as much as their sketch would be. So I think people in our position now need to kind of understand that as well, just in the other direction, where perhaps, like, the question is, don't show me the outputs, show me the inputs. Show me the logic that got you here. What was the intent behind this? Can we help craft through that? Can we help shape that? And then ultimately, the hope is that in good faith, we produce better practitioners of architecture for the future.
Treating it almost as, a science experiment. I think the word that you kept referencing, and I was hoping, and it's great that it's going there, is the intent, right? And I think that's the main kind of thing. So what was your intention on using this tool? And what's interesting is, like, so you intended it to some way, you did an input and you got this output that, subverted your expectation. And I think that's valuable to know. That's actually really interesting.
Yeah.
And how does that inform your intention, and how does that change your design? Maybe it doesn't. Maybe you're like, oh, that was just, garbage, and I shouldn't. Let's try it
Automatic
again.
writing is a thing, right?
Yeah.
Like it's a way of like working through thoughts. Dadaism, it was a thing, right? Yeah, absolutely. Sorry.
Right.
I think it's
No. I
powerful.
mean, yeah, we're dialoguing. I love it. So we're 30 minutes over. I mean, I could keep talking about this forever. Yeah, no, because this is it would kind of be a shame to stop now, but we could keep going if you guys have time. If not, we could put a cork in it and talk later.
And I think from my perspective, what this sounds like, it sounds like we're developing a pretty decent rapport.
Yeah.
I hope you enjoyed part 2 of my conversation with Jason and Mario. If you missed part 1 and would like to hear our thoughts on computational design as it currently stands in the AEC industry, please find the link in the description. Also, like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed the content. And if you have any ideas for future podcasts, or if you want to be a guest, drop a comment or reach out to me directly.